all the analogies of sheep and sheep raisers may still not comprise anywhere near a full answer to this question. After all, we are not really talking about sheep on the commons. We are still talking about individual young men and women in the bedroom, concerned about personal problems. Under present conditions, all the education in the world may not change enough minds regarding how many children to bear. But there is a critical reason that education is so important: politics. If the present conditions do not encourage fertility, perhaps politics can change those present conditions. And in the world of politics, education has an Archimedean aspect. Give me education, and I have the lever that may move the political world, and consequently have a chance to change the conditions that produce the birth dearth. Let us now consider politics and the birth dearth. Until recently, it was almost axiomatic in the demographic trade that pronatalism doesn't work. There have been government schemes and programs tried throughout much of the developed world designed to increase fertility. These programs include child allowances, tax breaks, maternity leave, housing allowances, daycare, etc. But despite all these schemes, most nations saw fertility plunge and stay low. There seems to me to be several plausible reasons for perceived prior failure. The first and most obvious possibility is that, indeed, pronatalist policies just don't work. Many demographers maintain that birth rates may go up for a year or two after a pronatal policy is instituted, but that then the rates are likely to fall back. Perhaps social engineering is just not powerful enough to change people's minds about such personal and intimate decisions. That indeed is possible. Indeed, there is at least some general truth to it. A second thought is that fertility rates would be even lower were it not for pronatalist choices. But there is a third possibility. Some very interesting evidence has come up in recent years that may reveal that pronatalist policies can work. If so, it may change the way we think about these matters. Ironically, the evidence comes from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. Perhaps even more ironically, it involves something in short supply, behind the Iron Curtain, large amounts of cash.
Okay.
Now, to understand the point, I am not in the habit of praising the policies of totalitarian countries. Okay. I have devoted a portion of my personal and professional life to publicizing the sins of the evil empire. On this issue, too, I am very wary of totalitarian behavior. The ugly coercion of fertility in Romania, spelled it with an O this time, has already been mentioned. But, truth be told, most, not all, of the pronatalist schemes in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union in recent years have not been very different in kind from those that have been established in Western Europe. Both generally involve a variety of children's allowances, daycare, maternity leave, tax breaks, subsidies, and so on, although some of the East Europeans are making abortion more difficult, while West European countries are not. There are two big differences. The Eastern Europeans spend much more money relative to their economies than do the West Europeans, and their programs seem to be working. To put it as crassly as possible, it may well be that a serious case can be made from a policy point of view that some additional babies can be bought. One simple way to see the difference between Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe and free Western Europe is to look at the latest TFRs as compiled by the Population Reference Bureau. Eastern Europe, 2.1. Western Europe, 1.6. Beneath these broad aggregates, involving a total of 27 countries, are some fascinating stories of specific nations. Consider the two Germanys. same language, same historical and cultural antecedents, but with two different forms of government. West Germany is democratic and pluralist. East Germany is centralized, non-democratic, communist. And the two Germanys have very different financial levels of pro-natalist policies. As of 1972, both Germanys had almost identical TFRs. Total fertility rate, 1972, West Germany 1.72, East Germany 1.78. As the birth dearth hit in earnest, fertility fell in both Germanys. 1973, 1.54 for West Germany, 1.58 for East Germany. 1974, 1.51 for West Germany, 1.54 for East Germany. At about that time, East Germany began implementing a variety of very expensive pro-natalist measures. West Germany did not, and this is what happened. Oh, geez. Okay, 1975 through 1984. Let's see. West Germany went from 1.45 to 1.27, and East Germany went from 1.54 to 1.80. And I didn't read them all of them. I just went from 1975 to 1984.
Oh yeah.
There's it changes each year, but that's about it. It is going lower. But this East Germany went higher, West Germany went lower. West Germany, spending relatively little of a rich economy on pro-natalist measures, sunk to the pits of birth dearth, a TFR that would, if continued at their latest available rate, 1.29 for 1984, take their 61 million population down to 16 million by the end of the next century. East Germany is at a much higher fertility rate, but still negative. Their total population would go from 17 million today to 13 or 14 million at the end of the next century. In theory, at that time, East Germany would be about as populous as West Germany, although today the West is almost 4 times as large as the East. The evidence today is fairly clear. The Eastern European nations, although much poorer, spent much greater fractions of their incomes for family policies. One principal goal of these family policies is the increase of fertility. One estimate, The Fear of Population Decline by Michael Teitelbaum and J.M. Winter, citing T. Fredka, Family Assistance in Europe, Social Welfare or Pro-Natalist Policies, shows that if specific Western countries were to match the comparative level of family allowances provided for 3-child families in Hungary and Bulgaria, that would involve a 120% increase in Sweden, a 100% increase in West Germany, and a 70% increase in Britain. A big difference. A lot of money. If Czechoslovakia, which spends even more than Hungary and Bulgaria on child allowances, were used as a model instead, the Western countries would have to pony up yet an additional 60% to reach parity with the Czechs. Excuse me. And all this includes only the direct cash for child allowances, not for the array of services such as daycare, scholarships, maternal leave, or housing allowances, where, again, the Eastern European nations far outspend the Eastern European nations far outspend the West European ones in terms relative to their own poor economies. A lot of money. But as the numbers show, it seems to help. A recently instituted pro-natalist policy of partially paid maternal leave seems to have raised fertility rates in the European parts of the Soviet Union. That is, pro-natalism with extra high expenditures has worked up until now. Some demographers feel that Eastern European rates may fall back after a while, at least partially. Perhaps. But let us remember this. Although within Eastern Europe There are country-by-country differences. Eastern Europe, taken as a whole, started out some 20 years ago as the part of Europe with the lowest fertility rates. Its fertility rate now is the highest rate on the continent, and is higher even than the United States. For the Western democracies, nothing seems to have worked. What the East is doing looks like the only game in town. Here are the comparative numbers. Total fertility rates. 1960 through 1985. Eastern Europe went from 2.47 to 2.16. Western Europe went from 2.62 to 1.62. Source: UN Population Reference Bureau. In our search for solutions, this brings us back to politics. For governments driven by politics must be part of the remedy, although by no means the only part. It is, of course, easier to spend big pro-natalist government money in a non-free country than in a free country. In a non-free country, the ruler or rulers can sit down around a big table and make policy. They can look at a staff study that concludes that the nation will be in trouble unless the state provides much bigger child allowances, much more daycare, more pension benefits, bigger education stipends, and better tax incentives for those people with children. If the rulers agree, they can, in effect, say, so be it, we'll take from one sector of the economy and give to another sector, specifically to parents who bear children. And that's then law. That is not exactly how the system works in the US or the other Western democracies. In America, someone or some group might come to the conclusion that the country needs a family policy designed to reverse the birth dearth, as well as doing other good things. A congressman would be convinced a pro-natalist package of cash and service benefits might be proposed. What would happen next? A congressional committee staff might well examine it. So would the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, allegedly working on behalf of the White House. The Congress might then hold hearings. White House aides would give conflicting advice to the president. Lobbyists for the elderly might denounce the bill for offering new benefits for young people, but not the elderly. Critically, feminist groups might divide over the issue. The more radical groups might well condemn the proposal on the grounds that it was nothing but a smokescreen designed to put women back in the kitchen. Conservative groups might denounce the plan as a post-Reagan reversion to big government. Right-to-life groups would insist that the best way to increase the birth rate would be to make abortion illegal. The OMB would appear and make the case that the proposal was a budget buster, violating the guidelines of Graham-Rudman-Hollings. Nothing much would happen for quite a while, if ever. It is for that reason, it seems to me, that education of the broadest sort is the key to success, and will likely precede any major legislation. It was not until the American public was convinced about environmental and ecological degradation, not until little children yelled pollution when they saw a factory smokestack, that legislation flowed from Congress like a mighty stream. Remember, if we were to follow the workable and decent parts of the Eastern European model and adapt them to free circumstances, we are talking about using enormous resources. Streams. What? Freshets? Rivers. Veritable Niagaras of dollars. What the fuck? The nations of Western Europe have already shown us that relatively minor expenditures haven't done much good at stimulating additional fertility, and they've done much more than we have. Education and public concern can yield public pressure of every sort imaginable. Television news and specials, news magazine covers, editorials, media events, political coalitions, and ultimately electoral leverage in the voting booth. Only that pushes politicians to act on difficult issues Only politics can unlock the nation's treasury, and government dollars will form one big part of a larger plan necessary to erode the birth dearth before it erodes us. So, education first. Let the word go forth that a no-growth or shrinking Western population will harm the West and harm the U.S. That will probably cause economic turbulence, probably starting with the housing industry in the 1990s. That it may cause domestic tension, that over a longer stretch of time it can erode American power and American influence, that the forces of freedom may move toward a relative disadvantage to the forces of totalitarians or to the forces of the third world. That there will be much personal misery if a quarter to a fifth of women have no children, if fertility is so low that 4 grandparents must share 1 grandchild, and if lots of grandparents don't have any grandchildren. Let all the manifestations be understood, that immigrants don't steal jobs from natives, that we are not running out of resources, and that national poverty is not caused by national population growth. Then we can begin.
Did he say that immigrants don't steal our jobs?
Immigrants don't steal jobs from natives.
That's what I was trying to say to people on YouTube, because I was trying to get to the page where it finally said it, because I felt like a fool until you said it, and I'm like, oh, thank God.
It's page 144, just at the end of chapter 11.
Oh, good. Alright. I'm glad that existed. I'm glad I'm not seeing things.
Excuse me.
It's just positive, right? Compared to everything else that he's writing.
I guess so, yeah. Chapter 12. Practical Plans. Let us now assume that America has indeed been educated to the perils of the birth dearth. As explained here, let us assume further that we have begun to engender a spirit of activism that can help our cause. What next? How do we move the cause further forward? And what specifically are we for? In the public realm? In the private realm? Domestically? Internationally? There are 2 natural allies for a big domestic pro-natal activist movement, and strangely enough, on many issues, these potential allies are often bitter adversaries. No matter to us, we pro-natalists have big things to do and miles to go. We will take our friends where we find them. Think first of American feminism, a well-organized, politically powerful and savvy movement. Okay. It is unlikely that a serious pro-natal movement could make it without feminist support. I simplify. The first feminist wave said women should have the right to work at good jobs in the money economy, and indeed, that if they didn't, they weren't fulfilling themselves. A second wave of working and allegedly fulfilled women said something else. We want to work, but we're missing something if we don't get the food to raise a family. We're supposed to have a serious career and keep house and have children. What? Under current conditions, trying to be supermom may be too tough. These women are not against having children, quite the opposite. They are looking for help to allow them to pursue careers and have children. The feminists of this stripe are concentrating on boosting a services strategy, typically pushing items such as federal support for daycare and paid maternal leave. They want to make it easier for a committed working woman to have kids. Intuition tells us that it is these working women who are more than likely to be on the job on a full-time basis. Who are the women who are more likely to have only 1 child or none? The data back it up. Such new services might turn the nuns and ones into ones and twos. That's fine, 1 step. Think now not of feminism, but of the pro-family movement springing from the conservative side of American life. Pro-life? Anti-abortion? They, too, have developed massive political clout. They demand traditional values. They typically oppose abortion. They often oppose sex education, including the teaching of contraceptive use in public schools. They believe more in private sector activity than in public sector activity. They believe mothers should spend time at home with their children certainly when the children are very young. There are obvious differences between the means and the goals of the traditionalists and the feminists. But is there some common ground that pro-natalists can develop that might find support from both traditionalists and feminists? I think perhaps so.